He built a $2.5 billion partnership over 2 years, but when a bank teller dropped his mother's ID on the floor like trash, he shut it all down. It was just supposed to be a quick errand. Dorian Langley didn't even take his laptop. No blazer, no business phone, just a plain t-shirt, jeans, and his mother's handbag looped over his arm as they stepped into the Tri-South Bank branch on Tryon Street, Charlotte. He glanced at the time. 2:17 p.m. If all went well, they'd be in and out in 10 minutes, maybe 15 if the line dragged. "Why do they always keep it so cold in these places?" his mother, Lorraine Langley, asked as she tucked her cardigan tighter. "You think it's cold now? Wait till they hit you with them hidden fees." Dorian joked. Lorraine chuckled. "Watch your mouth. This ain't one of your startup meetings." He grinned. They walked up to the counter when a station cleared. A young teller, early 20s, ash-blonde hair tied back in a stiff bun, motioned them forward. Her name tag read Rebecca Halverson. She didn't smile. Dorian stayed one step behind his mother as she approached. Lorraine pulled out her license and a small folder. Her voice was soft, pleasant. "Hi, I just need to verify my account. They told me I needed to bring ID in person." Rebecca nodded once, barely making eye contact. She took the ID, studied it for a few seconds longer than necessary, then glanced at Dorian. Her brows twitched. Barely, but it was there. A flicker of something. Assumption? Suspicion? It lasted no more than a blink. But Dorian caught it. He always did. He'd been catching it for 42 years. Without saying a word, Rebecca reached her hand over the glass divider and let the ID fall. It clattered face down on the tile floor. Lorraine blinked in confusion, bent down slowly, and picked it up. Her fingers trembled slightly. She looked back up, but Rebecca was already turning to her computer. No apology. No, sorry, Mom. No acknowledgement. The air felt thinner somehow. Behind them, someone in line shifted. An older white man muttered something under his breath. Dorian didn't catch the words, but he caught the smirk. Lorraine stood still for a second. Then she gave Dorian a look he hadn't seen in years. That tight-lipped, keep-your-head-up expression she used to wear, walking him to school in a neighborhood that never quite welcomed them. He hated that look. Hated that she still needed it. Dorian took a half step forward. Calm voice. Even tone. "Excuse me, is your manager available?" Rebecca didn't look up. "He's in a meeting. Can I speak to someone else?" She shrugged without raising her head. "They're busy right now." The moment stretched. Dorian could feel eyes on them now. The man behind them coughed once. The lobby's bland muzak suddenly felt louder. Lorraine tapped his elbow gently. "Let it go," she whispered. He looked at her, then back at Rebecca, who still hadn't met his eyes once. Not since dropping the ID. Dorian breathed in through his nose. "We'll be back another time." Rebecca didn't reply. Lorraine gave a small smile to no one in particular as they walked away. It was the kind of smile you wear when you're trying to exit with grace and not shatter into pieces. They reached the parking lot. Lorraine exhaled and started to say something, but Dorian raised a hand gently. "Later." She nodded. They sat in the car for a moment. Quiet. Lorraine placed the ID back in her purse with slow, careful hands. Dorian stared at the steering wheel. It was just a card. Just a fall, just a second. But it didn't feel small. It felt loud, like something had been declared, and even louder than what happened was who had been watching. But that moment was about to echo far beyond that building. Dorian Langley didn't grow up with money. He grew up with standards. His mother, Lorraine, worked 30 years at a public library in Birmingham, Alabama. His father, Clarence, ran a repair shop behind their duplex, until his back gave out one day and never quite healed right. What they lacked in income, they made up for in discipline, books, and conversations around the dinner table that didn't end until everyone had said something that mattered. By high school, Dorian was building computers out of donated parts. His bedroom looked like a miniature lab, wires snaking over carpet, towers stacked in corners, the constant whir of fans spinning long after midnight. Lorraine would peek her head in and shake hers. "Just don't burn down the house." She never asked him to stop. She just made sure he had what he needed. By 26, Dorian had built Langley Systems into one of the Southeast's most respected cybersecurity firms. Not flashy, not big name, but reliable, clean-coded, and brilliant in its architecture. They quietly protected voter registration systems in 4 states and handled security for over 100 small banks and credit unions. His team, diverse, young, fiercely smart, called him Lang, though never to his face. And now, at 42, Dorian was on the edge of something massive. The $2.5 billion deal had taken 2 years to negotiate. It wasn't just about money. It was about infrastructure, generational uplift, and access. The deal with Tri-South Bank would allow Langley Systems to expand secure mobile banking tools across underfunded counties in the Deep South, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, places that were often left out of innovation conversations. More importantly, it would pave the way for minority-owned startups to get in the room. Real equity, real access, real presence. Dorian had designed the framework so others like him could bypass the same locked doors he had to pry open. It had taken 13 revisions, 6 board presentations, 2 major conferences. He'd flown to Baltimore, Salt Lake City, Sacramento, all for this one partnership. Every dotted I, every crossed T, it had been meticulous. And now, it all sat in limbo because someone let his mother's ID hit the floor like it didn't mean anything. In the grand scheme, some might call it a small slight. But to Dorian, it said everything. It said, I see her, I don't care. She doesn't matter, you don't matter. And that's the thing. He wasn't looking for special treatment. He didn't need to be recognized. He didn't even introduce himself in that bank lobby. It wasn't about who he was. It was about how his mother, his elder, was treated when no one knew or cared who she was. That told him all he needed to know about their values. He thought back to the last call he'd had with the Tri-South board just 3 days earlier. A Zoom meeting with 7 squares, all suits, polished smiles. Dorian, one of them had said, your team has earned our trust. This partnership is going to change the game. He had smiled then. A real one. He believed it. Now, parked outside that very bank, he realized, if their culture allowed this in plain view, what happened behind closed doors? Lorraine sat beside him, flipping slowly through the mail she'd picked up earlier. She didn't say anything, didn't push. She knew that look in his eye, that still, analytical quiet. The one he had just before walking away from $2 million in venture capital years ago because the terms smelled wrong. Dorian finally spoke. You okay? She nodded. I've been okay through worse. He reached into the glove box and pulled out a legal pad, tore a page, wrote something in neat block print. She looked over and asked softly, That the email? He nodded. She didn't ask what it said. He didn't tell her. But nothing about his title could erase what his mother just experienced. Dorian didn't sleep much that night. The hotel bed felt stiff, the air too dry, the room too quiet. He wasn't restless from rage. Anger burned quick and useless. What he felt was closer to a slow, simmering clarity. A calculation. A mental sort of bookkeeping. By morning, he'd already played the entire interaction over in his head, 20 different ways. Each time the result stayed the same. Lorraine's eyed on the floor, Rebecca's blank face, and the silence that filled the lobby like smoke. Still, a small part of him hoped maybe he'd overread the moment. Maybe someone from the bank had realized the mistake and called his mother overnight. Maybe this morning would look different. So he gave it one more shot. He and Lorraine drove back to the branch around 9:30 a.m. No appointments, no emails, just presence. The teller booths were busier this time. They waited 10 minutes before a different clerk, a young black man named Tyrese, waved them over with a kind smile. Good morning. How can I help you both today? Dorian returned the greeting and explained calmly that he'd like to speak with the branch manager about a concern from the previous day. Tyrese's expression shifted just slightly. Not surprise, not discomfort. More like hesitation. "1 moment, sir," he said politely, before disappearing behind a grey door near the vault. They waited. And waited. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Dorian kept an eye on Lorraine, who sat in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs lining the wall. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. She hadn't said a word. Eventually, Tyrese returned. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice carefully measured. "Mr. Slater's unavailable at the moment. He's tied up in meetings the rest of the morning." Dorian looked at him. Really looked. And Tyrese didn't flinch, but his eyes said what his words wouldn't. He couldn't help. Not without risking something. "Can we schedule a time to meet later today?" Dorian asked. Tyrese hesitated. "He's booked until Thursday." Dorian gave a tight smile. "Understood." No scene. No raised voices, no escalation, just a nod, a thank you, and the slow walk back toward the exit. Behind him, a woman with a stroller looked up from her phone, eyes lingering for a second too long. A man in a business suit leaned against the étroit, pretending not to listen. Dorian reached for the door, held it open for Lorraine. Outside, the sunlight felt sharper. They walked back to the car. Lorraine paused at the passenger door, hand resting on the handle, eyes squinting into the distance. "I don't know why you expected anything else," she said quietly. Not bitterness, just fact. "I didn't," he replied. "I just wanted them to have the opportunity. To do the right thing." He nodded. Lorraine looked at him, soft sadness in her face. "Baby, people show you what's in their heart when they think no one's watching. And when they're bold enough to do it while folks are watching, that's not a mistake. That's permission." Dorian didn't answer. Just sat down in the driver's seat and rested both hands on the wheel. She was right. Inside that branch, Rebecca hadn't dropped the ID out of distraction or clumsiness. It was intentional. And what made it worse was the blankness afterward. The complete absence of accountability. No manager had checked the cameras. No one had reviewed the interaction. No one had cared enough to step forward, even 24 hours later. They didn't just allow it. They absorbed it. Because that's how institutions work when no one is watching from above. Dorian knew this from years of sitting in rooms where the power brokers didn't see him until the deck was already reshuffled. Knew what it meant to be tolerated, but not respected. And now, they had told him, without ever saying his name, how they truly viewed his mother. Which meant they'd told him everything he needed to know about how they'd eventually treat him. But he wasn't angry. Not yet. He was measuring something. Back at the hotel, Dorian moved differently. He didn't pace, didn't scroll his phone or turn on the news. He laid his blazer out across the desk chair, checked it for lint, and hung it neatly back in the closet. He took his time folding the clothes he wasn't going to wear. Then he powered up his laptop. Not the MacBook he used for presentations. The old ThinkPad. The one he only opened for things that needed precision. Real decisions. He didn't draft a press release, didn't call legal. There was no need for debate. He opened a blank email window and typed 7 words. "Respect isn't negotiable. We're pulling out." No sincerely, no logo, no signature banner with LinkedIn links, just plain text, raw and cold. He entered 5 email addresses. Top brass at Tri-South Bank. People who'd wined and dined him. Men who called him brother after quarterly meetings. Women who said they admired how gracefully he handled boardroom pressure. He hit send. Lorraine watched from the room's little love seat. She didn't ask what the email said. She didn't need to. She could read the temperature of his stillness. "You want me to call them?" she offered softly. He shook his head. No. A silence passed between them. Then she asked the one question she rarely ever asked. "Are you sure?" Completely. He turned his chair slightly and looked at her. "I spent 2 years building something with people who didn't blink when you were disrespected. Not in private. In public." She looked down, nodded once. "I appreciate that, son. But don't do this for me. I'm not," he said. "I'm doing it because of you." He looked back at the screen. Messages had already started coming in. "Need to talk." "Can we hop on a call? What's going on, Dorian?" "This can't be final. Let's sort this out." He didn't reply. He'd spent most of his adult life over-explaining things that didn't need explanation. He wasn't about to start now. Not for a company that couldn't say the words "we were wrong." He closed the laptop. Meanwhile, 475 miles away, the Tri-South Bank executive team was in meltdown. The first to see the email was Karena Alcott, the senior VP of strategic growth. She froze, reread it twice, and immediately called Mark Temple, the CEO. Mark was in the middle of a round of golf at a private course in Chattanooga. "Karene, I'm on the 7th hole. What's the... Langley's pulling out." "Excuse me?" No explanation. Just sent 7 words. That's it. Mark rubbed his forehead. "When?" 15 minutes ago. "Get everyone on a call in 20. By the time they gathered on Zoom, panic was already spreading like smoke. Internally, the Tri-South team had marketed the Langley deal as their crown jewel for Q4. Investors were expecting news. The board had tied their DEI strategy to it. Their PR arm had already drafted the press package. And now, it was gone. "Somebody call him," Temple ordered. "We've got 36 hours before this leaks." Karene tried. 4 times. Voicemail. Meanwhile, in a quiet Charlotte hotel room, Dorian muted every notification on his phone. He and Lorraine sat side by side on the love seat, not watching TV, just sitting, sharing the silence. They'd been through louder moments in life, but this one felt heavier. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the collapse of the deal. It was the idea that even after all the careful planning, the meticulous relationship building, the quiet excellence, there were still places where his mother's humanity could be dropped on the floor without a second thought. But the storm wasn't in what he said. It was in what he refused to say. Inside Tri-South's downtown headquarters in St. Petersburg, Florida, the mood had shifted from urgency to damage control within hours. They didn't know exactly what had happened at the Charlotte branch, only that whatever it was bad enough to make Dorian Langley walk. And worse, he'd walked without a sound. That kind of silence had a weight executives could feel before the public ever heard a word. A closed-door meeting was scheduled within 90 minutes of the email. Present were Mark Temple, CEO, Karene Alcott, SVP of Strategic Growth, Jonah Weil from Compliance, and 2 lawyers from outside counsel. All screens off, all phones silenced. "We need to be very clear about what caused this," Temple said. "No guesswork, no assumptions. What the hell happened in Charlotte?" Jonah had already pulled the access logs. "Langley and his mother were in the Tryon branch at 2:17 p.m. yesterday. There's no official complaint, but a teller named Rebecca Halverson handled them." Karene frowned. "Have we spoken to her yet?" "Spoke to the branch manager, Nathan Silver. He says she didn't report anything unusual." "Of course she didn't," Karene muttered. "We need the footage." Jonah nodded. "Already flagged. Reviewing now. If it goes public, Temple cut in. "We control the tone, not him." Karene raised an eyebrow. "You think we still can?" No one answered. By that afternoon, Rebecca Halverson sat across from Nathan Silver in a back office at the Charlotte branch. Her arms were folded, her mouth tight. "Did you have any kind of confrontation with Mr. Langley or his mother yesterday?" Nathan asked, voice neutral. She shook her head. "No, they didn't even seem upset." "Did you drop her ID?" Rebecca looked him straight in the eye. "I handed it back. If she dropped it, that's on her." Nathan paused. That wasn't what he'd heard from Tyrese, the other teller, who said he'd seen something but wasn't sure it was on purpose. Just that it looked bad. Nathan made a note, then another, then slid a form across the table. "We're putting you on administrative leave until further notice." Rebecca stared at it. "For what?" "We just need time to review everything." "I didn't do anything wrong." Nathan didn't respond. Back in Florida, Karene drafted a message to Dorian. It was formal but warm, direct but apologetic. "Mr. Langley, we're deeply concerned about your decision to withdraw. If there's been a misunderstanding, we'd appreciate the opportunity to speak and address it immediately." She didn't hit send, because deep down, she knew it wouldn't be read. The legal team advised against any public statement. Yet. Not until they were sure what Dorian's next move was. But Dorian had already made it. He had no plans to sue, no intention of going public. He'd made no press calls, no interviews, no LinkedIn posts. That was what terrified them most. Silence meant control, and control meant unpredictability. Inside the corporate offices, the narratives started to fracture. Some executives wanted to double down, call it a miscommunication. Others pushed for a formal apology, even if it was never acknowledged. Still more were afraid to admit anything at all, in case it opened the door to legal exposure. They had no idea what Dorian was thinking. But he wasn't thinking about them at all. He was thinking about the morning his mother sat next to him on the hotel couch and told him she felt invisible. Not surprised, not even hurt, just tired. She looked at me like I was a problem, Lorraine had said. Like I wasn't supposed to be there. Dorian had said nothing. That silence, that stillness, that unshakable clarity is what the boardroom couldn't compete with. Rebecca didn't lose her job. Not yet. Just sent home, pending internal review. It was the kind of vague label that never quite says what people want it to mean. But inside TriSouth, reputations were unraveling, and the deal, the one they'd spent 2 years threading together, was dissolving faster than they could build a strategy around it. But a band-aid over a bullet wound doesn't stop the bleeding. That evening, they didn't go out. Dorian ordered food from a quiet southern kitchen 2 blocks from the hotel. Chicken and rice. Stewed okra. Cornbread still warm in the bag. Lorraine sat across from him in the suite's small dining area, her plate untouched for a while. She looked out the window as traffic crawled below. Dorian watched her, waiting. Finally, she broke the silence. I remember a time I couldn't even open an account without a man's signature. He didn't respond. He just let her speak. They'd give you this look. Same one that girl gave me yesterday. Like they're doing you a favor, just letting you in the building. She paused. I thought we were past that. Dorian took a sip of his water. You'd think we would be. She picked up her fork and stirred the rice around her plate. I wasn't mad at her, you know. That teller. I've seen worse. Felt worse. That's not the point, he said. I know. Another long pause. She finally looked at him. You really cancelled the whole deal? I did. You worked 2 years on that. I know. You think they'll care? He gave her a long look. They'll care more than they're letting on, but not for the reasons they should. Lorraine's lips pressed together. Then she gave a short, sad laugh. Well, I raised you to be a man who could walk away. Just didn't think you'd have to. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing the edge of the table with his thumb. I used to think it was about achievement, he said. Proving myself. Winning the right to be in the room. It's not? No, he said. It's about walking out of the room when you see who's sitting at the table. Lorraine nodded. That's harder. He thought about all the rooms he'd stayed in too long. All the hands he'd shaken. All the fake smiles, the half compliments, the well-meaning tones laced with something else underneath. All the times he'd let it slide because the goal was bigger than the moment. Not this time. She picked up her fork again and finally took a bite. I'm proud of you. Dorian looked at her. I wish that didn't have to come from moments like this. You're still changing things, she said. I wanted to change things with access, with partnerships. You still can, she replied. Just not with people who treat you like that. Dorian didn't say it aloud, but he already knew. This wasn't just a deal that collapsed. It was a pivot, a change in direction, a realization that sometimes the strategy has to shift mid-game if the players show their hand too early. He thought back to a conversation with a young entrepreneur he'd mentored a few months earlier. The guy had asked, "How do you know when it's time to walk away?" Dorian's answer then had been, "When the value of your presence is measured by how quietly you take up space." Now he'd add something to that. When they disrespect the people who raised you, they've already made their choice. He reached for the cornbread, split it in half, and slid a piece across the table. Here, he said. Best part of the meal. Lorraine smiled softly. You always did save the good stuff. They ate in silence after that. But it wasn't heavy. It wasn't angry. It was the kind of silence that comes when something has settled inside you, when the decision's been made, and it doesn't need to be explained anymore. Later, as Dorian stood at the window with the lights dimmed behind him, he thought about legacy. Not the kind written in contracts or wired through accounts, but the kind passed down in quiet choices, in unspoken boundaries, in who you choose not to become. But hearing it out loud changed how he saw the next move. The next morning, inboxes across 5 states lit up. Lawyers from Langley Systems issued a formal withdrawal notice to Tri-South Bank's legal team. Simple language, no drama, just finality. Effective immediately, all partnership discussions, proposals and projections between Langley Systems and Tri-South Bank are discontinued in full. It hit like a brick. Mark Temple, CEO of Tri-South, got the email while sitting in his car outside a donor breakfast in Tampa. He didn't even go in. He just stared at the screen, jaw set. No reply. Nothing he could type would make it disappear. Within 30 minutes, he called an emergency meeting with his top team. Corinna Alcott joined the call with her camera off. She'd already warned them the day before. She'd seen this coming. "This is real," she said flatly. "He's not bluffing." "But no press, no noise," Temple said. "He could have gone public. That buys us some room." "Room for what?" she shot back. "Damage control? With who?" Silence. By noon, Tri-South's internal systems flagged nearly $18 million in paused transfers from smaller firms connected to Langley's network. Contracts delayed, funds frozen. One by one, the ripple widened. Langley Systems didn't just walk, they stopped moving. Vendors they'd brought in backed out of scheduled demos. Minority-led firms who'd been waiting for Dorian's tech infrastructure to boost their platforms began making calls. Some switched banks entirely. Still, there was no formal statement, no tweet, no quote, no leak. But those who mattered, those in the rooms where this kind of thing meant something, they already knew. In Austin, an investor Dorian had worked with in the past texted him. "Just heard. Didn't see that coming." Bold move. In Mobile, a local university paused a Tri-South-sponsored STEM program. Quietly. In Memphis, a black-owned real estate fund cancelled a lunch event that had Tri-South listed as a featured partner. None of this made headlines. But inside the corridors of tech and finance, the silence around it was the headline. Back in Charlotte, Dorian spent the day with Lorraine at a community garden she'd wanted to visit. It was quiet, peaceful, rows of green beans and tomatoes and kids chasing bees with juice boxes in their hands. He answered only one call that day, from his operations manager, Julissa. She didn't ask him why. She just said, "Whatever you need, we're behind you." He told her to review all active banking relationships. Pull the numbers. Look for smaller institutions that had deep community ties and actual values, not just branding. "Start in places where my mother would be treated like someone's elder," he said. "Not someone's inconvenience." Julissa laughed gently. "I already got 3 shortlists." That was the thing about his team. They didn't need to be sold on principle. They'd been built on it. By week's end, the executive board at Tri-South was still scrambling. The marketing team had prepped 3 different PR statements, all scrapped. Their compliance department drafted an internal Q&A for investor relations. But the calls kept coming. "What happened to the Langley deal? Why did he back out? Is it true what we heard?" And no one had a clean answer, because they still hadn't addressed the root. They were trying to fix a business problem without touching the cultural one. And that's what separated Dorian from them. He hadn't walked because of one dropped ID. He'd walked because the institution revealed its DNA. And once he saw it, he couldn't unsee it. He didn't need a fight. He needed clarity. And now he had it. But that silence was louder than any press release. The public still hadn't heard a word, but inside the industry, the fallout was no secret. It started subtly, like a light dimming room by room. One Tri-South-sponsored panel on inclusive tech development was quietly pulled from a fintech summit in Phoenix. No explanation, just gone from the program. Then a keynote speaker at a DEI forum in Atlanta dropped out last minute. When asked why, she just said, "Timing didn't feel right." Langley's name never came up. Not publicly. But inside those circles, everyone knew He'd said nothing, but his absence said everything. At Langley Systems, the press office received over 40 media inquiries in a single week. Tech blogs, business columns, even legacy papers from Philadelphia and Dallas wanted to know what went wrong. Dorian declined them all. Instead, he made one change. He updated his personal LinkedIn banner to a black square with white text. Character is currency. No statement, no context. It went viral anyway. Over 100,000 impressions in 48 hours. Thousands of reposts. Quiet nods from other CEOs who'd also had moments they never spoke about. Employees, founders, creators, people who saw what happened without ever needing it spelled out. Meanwhile, TriSouth's quarterly investor call was tense. Mark Temple opened with confidence, rattling off numbers, projections, and carefully positive language. But by the second question, it was clear where the focus was. Has the termination of the Langley partnership affected your outlook for next quarter? Temple paused. Just half a second too long. We remain focused on long-term strategic value. While one partnership has ended, our commitment to innovation is unchanged. It was polished. Safe, but not convincing. Investors weren't just worried about the money, they were worried about the silence. The story behind the curtain that no one would say out loud. Because if a high-integrity CEO like Dorian Langley could walk away from a $2.5 billion deal without hesitation, what did he see that made it so easy? In Miami, a minority-owned logistics firm called Bayspan withdrew from a TriSouth pilot program. In Birmingham, a non-profit school initiative quietly redirected their partnership to a smaller regional bank. One by one, connections loosened. Emails went unanswered. Meetings were rescheduled indefinitely. But the biggest shift came from within. TriSouth's younger staff, especially Black, Latinx, and Asian professionals, started speaking up. Not loudly, not confrontationally, just asking quiet questions in one-on-ones. Who are we really aligned with? Are our values just marketing? What happens when things go wrong and no one's looking? Leadership didn't have answers, because they hadn't asked themselves those questions before. Kareni Alcott, who had once pushed hardest for the Langley partnership, started drafting her resignation. She didn't send it yet, but she stared at the screen for hours. She'd built her career on bridging institutions with integrity, and now, she realized, she was still bridging, just standing in between people who didn't want to cross. Meanwhile, Dorian was moving forward. His team had already contacted 3 credit unions in the South that had a record of real community investment. Not the kind that sat in pamphlets, but the kind you could see in local classrooms and small business loans that didn't require perfect credit. He sent each of them a personal note, not a pitch, just interest. A willingness to build something if they shared the vision. Within a week, all 3 responded. Langley Systems had paused for just a moment, but only to pivot. Dorian wasn't in retreat. He was in redirection. Because legacy wasn't about who made the most noise, it was about who kept showing up, quietly, consistently, with values that didn't bend under pressure. TriSouth didn't crumble overnight. Their buildings still stood, their accounts still opened. But something shifted in the spaces they couldn't measure. Their image wasn't broken. It was hollow. And that was something no PR campaign could fill. But what the headlines missed was the real story. A full year passed, and TriSouth never recovered in the way it wanted to. They stayed afloat. Sure, still operated over 200 branches across the Southeast. But behind the public-facing campaigns and community reinvestment slogans, the vacuum left by the Langley exit never quite closed. By Q3 of the following year, TriSouth's market value had dropped 11%. Not catastrophic, but steady. Investors called it softening confidence. Insiders knew better. Dorian Langley never spoke publicly about what happened, but his actions never stopped speaking. Langley Systems didn't just survive, it expanded. Within 6 months of walking away from the deal, Dorian had launched a partnership with Crescent Federal Credit Union, a smaller faith-based banking institution headquartered in Shreveport, Louisiana. Most people hadn't even heard of it, but they were rooted deeply in their neighborhoods. They ran financial literacy workshops at community centers, offered microloans to first-time business owners, and sponsored mobile clinics in rural areas. Dorian didn't pitch them a massive rollout. He offered them structure, cybersecurity, app development, and a scalable blueprint they could grow into, on their terms. They said yes, eagerly. What started as a modest tech support deal turned into a regional overhaul. By the end of the year, Crescent had quadrupled its mobile banking user base. More importantly, they did it with dignity. No press conferences, no tokenism, just work. Meanwhile, Rebecca Halverson was now working the customer service counter at a retail electronics store in Columbia, South Carolina. She wasn't fired. TriSouth never admitted any